Hello everyone, Ben here, and today we're going to be starting the 2020 presidential election playlist, and this is going to be Trump. So, this video is going to be providing just a tiny bit of background on the 2020 election, that way you don't have to sit through a rehash, and also just Trump versus a generic Democrat, okay? Because we need a baseline before we get into the rest. And from there will be we'll start with, after this episode, we'll go through 8 candidates. 5 who I'll call serious or extremely likely, who I think will have at least a halfway decent shot of beating Trump. And then 3 not so serious candidates, whether, it's highly unlikely they run, they've got severe issues in terms of electability or whatever. And I'm going from most likely to beat Trump to least likely to beat Trump in both cases. So I may think one of the not so serious candidates actually stands a better chance than one of the serious candidates. So anyway, the serious candidates, I'll go ahead and just spill them out. That way you can plan accordingly if you want. So that would be Sherrod Brown, followed by Elizabeth Warren, followed by Tim Kaine, and Kamala Harris, then Cory Booker, followed by Dwayne Johnson, for the not-so-serious candidates, Dwayne Johnson, Mark Cuban, and Kanye West. Okay, and there are various reasons. Now, I'm not going to go through everything, but not since... Whew. This is a tough one, actually, to think about. Not since... Okay, since the turn, since 1900, okay? Since 1900, we have had only 4 presidents who were not reelected out of, despite running for re-election, okay? The ones who didn't run for re-election, who were one-termers, were, was it Warren Harding, Warren G. Harding. He died before he was up for re-election. The next one-termer was actually his successor, Calvin Coolidge, but Calvin Coolidge declined to run a second time, so he doesn't count. And I'm also not counting Warren G. Harding as well, so those 2 already don't count. It was William Howard Taft, but that was a very screwy election because of Theodore Roosevelt. So, William Howard Taft, followed by Herbert Hoover, and that was partially because of the Great Depression, actually entirely because of the Great Depression. People blamed him. Wrongfully, but I won't get into that here. The next one, it took until Jimmy Carter to have another, so that's 40 years. It took 40 years before the next president who failed to win the re-election. I'm not counting Lyndon Baines Johnson because he was a one-termer, but same with JFK. Both of those, LBJ didn't want to run for re-election. Of course, we all know what happened to Kennedy. I'm also not counting Gerald Ford because, number one, he wasn't even elected to begin with, and he was a one-termer. So you could argue that he failed to win election, but he's a screwy case anyway. Okay? So it was Jimmy Carter. And then, of course, lastly was George H.W. Bush, who, of course, ran into Clinton. And All of them had very good reasons why they failed to win re-election. William Howard Taft was very unpopular with his own party, so much so that Theodore Roosevelt won. Got more votes than he did. And Theodore Roosevelt is arguably the most successful third-party candidate in U.S. history. Herbert Hoover, people blamed him for the Great Depression. And Jimmy Carter, people blamed him for the Iran hostage thing, as well as stagflation in the late 70s. Both rightfully so. Well, maybe not the Iran thing. The Iran hostage crisis was not Carter's fault. But stagflation more than likely had some cause in Carter's economic policy. And George H.W. Bush really just ran into Bill Clinton, who was extremely popular. But here's the thing. Incumbency is very powerful here in the States. Very few people have been involuntary one-termers. Very few. So I'm kind of judging a lot of my prediction based off of the power of incumbency, the incumbency advantage. In addition, we're going to be looking at economic data, which currently is pretty good. I think it was the Dow is up 20% since the election, thereabouts, and reaching all-time highs. The Dow is doing a very good job. And that's important for one reason. I'll get to it when I get to talking about the states that I expect each candidate, Trump to win versus a generic Democrat. I'll get to that. So what we have to do is look at what each candidate's baseline is. And also realize that even if the economy is doing well, even social scandal doesn't really matter, as Bill Clinton's campaign offices, are famous for having a sign that said, "It's the economy, stupid." And so that's what we're going to do. So let's just break it down. We're going to start off with states that I suspect, let's get rid of this district, that are solid for each candidate. And yes, I'm going to include Texas, even though it was within 10. It was only just barely within 10. These are the states that Trump should be expected to win no matter what. Oh yeah, sorry, Alaska. Let's not forget about Alaska. And these are going to be the states that whoever a generic Democrat should be expected to win no matter what. And honestly, this means any Democrat. And that would be the first district. I'm going to actually leave Maine all blank right now. And, okay. Oh yeah, Vermont and New York. Oops, that's supposed to be blue. Okay, and let's not forget Hawaii. Okay, so in states that each candidate should be expected to win no matter what, no matter how unpopular, Democrats do have a slight advantage, but not as much as, not a so 19 electoral votes. Now let's go to the likely states. States that the candidates more than likely should win. And I'm including Ohio in this because it broke extremely hard for Trump. More so than a lot of people probably expected. I expected maybe a 2-point win. It was a 9-point win. And then I'm also including Georgia, mainly because of incumbency. And also the 2nd Congressional District in Maine. Okay? So, now we're going to look at the states Democrats are more than likely going to win. And sad as it is, it's really only 2 states. But they're states, one of which used to be a fairly solid Republican state, and the other has been in this zone of more than likely the Democrat presidential candidate is going to win there since the 80s, no, probably longer than that, actually. Much longer than that. For a long time, really. Okay, and now we're on to the leaning states. The states that in a normal election will go for... Oops, sorry, I missed that. Sorry, that's a likely Dem vote. That will more than likely lean towards a certain candidate. And this is where the Republicans really do have an advantage. In the battleground states, they tend to have just the slightest of edges in certain battlegrounds, typically in the South and the West. The Midwest is where they do have to make some progress. Okay, so this means that... Oh yeah, sorry, whoops. Okay. Things are really changing for the Democrats in a bad way in the Midwest. Now, of course, that's being offset by losses from the Republicans in the South and the Southwest. It's not quite there yet, but it's starting to get there. Problem for the Democrats is the Republicans made inroads in the Midwest faster than the Democrats made inroads in the South. Anyway. So these are my true toss-ups. States that are going to be major battlegrounds. In 2020. Okay? It's 91 votes. I decided I'm going to leave Virginia. It really is becoming a blue state, or at least a fairly blue-leaning swing state. So, let's go one by one through them and show what I would expect Trump to do versus a generic Democrat, a milquetoast Democrat who has no real super positives or super negatives. It's kind of just, there. Slightly to the right of Clinton, but slightly left of a true independent. And a Democrat who supports, maybe a New Deal economic policy and, a social policy of live and let live, baby. Okay? Maybe slight, increase in the minimum wage to like $9 instead of $12 or $15 or higher. Okay? And somebody from the right region, which, in my opinion, is currently the Midwest. You don't want a Northeast liberal, and I don't think you want a West Coast liberal. You want somebody from in between, from maybe a flyover county, or a flyover state in this case. But let's go. Minnesota. I still don't think it's quite ready for Republican against a generic Democrat. But I definitely think it's going to be the surprisingly close state in 2020. Okay, there's not much really to say about that. Wisconsin went Republican by a decent margin, about I think it was either a little under or a little over 1%. I think that's going to hold in 2020. It's going to be very close, but it's going to be a margin that doesn't really leave room for a recount, but it's still going to be close. But Trump would probably win it against a generic Democrat. Michigan, same thing. And this is where you realize the Democrats' problems. Trump is still a populist, and he's still popular in these areas. Overall, maybe not so much. But in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, and in flyover country, he's still pretty popular. And I'm seeing this in my college town, okay? Pennsylvania. This one was it was actually wider than I thought it was going to be. And in the other direction. You know, if I thought Trump would win, it would be the narrowest of margins. It was like 1.2%. Okay, I think he holds there, and that already puts him over the top. But we're going to continue, okay? I honestly think he's going to protect his map, so we're going to go down to Florida. I don't see Florida's votes changing. I think he's going to protect his map. But I also think he would expand it against a generic Democrat. Now, of course, this is against a generic Democrat. So no positives, no negatives, nothing that really distinguishes a generic Democrat. And we Americans are weird, and we kind of like our politicians not to be generic candidates. Because why would we want somebody who you could just, replace with somebody else, some other person, and there would be no real difference? Okay. In New Hampshire, I actually think he would flip New Hampshire because it was like only a 2,000 vote margin in New Hampshire. That's easy to change in 4 years. So against a generic Democrat, this is what I would expect. Now that's not to say, a different candidate could win, because a different Democrat candidate can definitely win. I do see it. I mean, almost half of Trump's votes come from states that'll be within 5%, and the states that would win him the election, these three are going to be within 3, and Florida could be within a single point. Now, Florida at the moment isn't enough, but Florida and Michigan, which I think will probably be the closest state Trump wins again, or maybe New Hampshire, but Florida and Michigan are definitely enough to change the election. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking is going to be Trump versus generic Democrat. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you had a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.